My name is Johnny, I'm from England and I've been living here in Moscow for almost 8 years. I've seen a lot of what people think this city is like. I've also seen the parts that rarely get shown that people don't know about, and religion is one of those parts. For most people outside of Russia, this is the image that comes to mind when they think about religion here: a grand Orthodox cathedral with golden domes or onion domes, monumental architecture, and the church which is central to both the skyline of Moscow and the storyline of Russia. This in particular is the Cathedral of Christ the Saviour, and it's more than just a church, it's a symbol of the Russian state, of Orthodoxy's central role in Russian national identity, and how religion here has survived and vanished and then re-emerged. Because this cathedral originally was built in the 19th century. It was intended as a tribute to Russia's victory over Napoleon, and it took decades to complete, and it stood for less than a century. It was knocked down. In 1931, under Stalin, it was demolished to make room for a massive palace of the Soviets, which was going to be a skyscraper topped with a giant Lenin statue, but it was never built. Instead, this site became the world's largest open-air swimming pool, and for decades this space was secular. But post-Soviet Russia changed that. In the 1990s, the cathedral that was once knocked down was rebuilt almost exactly as it had been. And today it's one of the most visited religious sites in the country. And while Orthodox Christianity dominates in Russia, today I want to explain and explore the quieter stories, the minority religions that have lived, struggled, and in some cases really flourished here in Moscow. Judaism in Russia has a long and often painful history. Jews first appeared in what's now Russia over 1,000 years ago, but for the vast majority of that time they've faced severe restrictions. Under the Tsars, Jewish communities were pushed into an area of the country called the Pale of Settlement, which is basically a massive region, but the only region where Jews were legally permitted to live, and it excluded major cities like Moscow. And getting permission to live here in the capital required special status, permission, and it was, even if they were here, public worship was often discouraged. It was very difficult. The Moscow Choral Synagogue was finally completed in 1906 after decades of legal wrangling. It's right in front of me right now. Even then, the design had to be altered to satisfy city authorities. A planned dome was removed and the building was made to look more discreet so it fit in with the city. But it quickly became a vital centre for Jewish life here in the capital. The rabbis there helped shape the cultural and religious life of Russia's Jewish population. And then came the Soviet Union, when religion was actively suppressed and most synagogues were closed. Jewish schools were shut down and religious leaders were arrested. But this one, the one I'm looking at right now, this building was allowed to stay open. In part, it was used as a showcase to the outside world. The Soviet Union could say, look, we still allow Jews to pray here. But the reality inside was one of surveillance, censorship, and pressure. But then, after the fall of the Soviet Union, the collapse of the USSR, Jewish life slowly returned. Some Jews left, mainly to Israel or the United States, but others stayed and they rebuilt. And today there are several functioning synagogues in the city. This one here, the Choral Synagogue, is the oldest, the most prominent, and for many it's still the heart of Jewish Moscow. Islam is not a foreign religion in Russia. It's been a part of this land for over 1,000 years, long before Russia became the Russian Empire. The first Muslims in what is now Russian territory were the Volga Bulgars, who converted in the 10th century to Islam. Later came the Tatars, the Bashkirs, the peoples of the Caucasus, and more recently, Central Asian migrants. Today, Islam is Russia's second largest religion, and Moscow is home to one of its largest Muslim populations. Estimates vary, but somewhere between 1 and 2 million Muslims live in or around Moscow. And for many years, actually, there just simply weren't enough mosques to serve them. During the Soviet times, religion of any kind was pushed out of public life. And by the 1980s, only one functioning mosque remained in the city. It was small and heavily monitored. And what you see today is the Moscow Cathedral Mosque. It's actually one of the largest mosques in Europe, and it opened in 2015 after a decade-long reconstruction. The old building was demolished and replaced with this. It's a massive, modern, gold-domed complex that can hold more than 10,000 worshippers at one time. And even that isn't always enough. On major holidays like Eid, thousands more pray outside here in the surrounding streets. Right here, literally on these streets. The mosque serves Tatars, Chechens, Dagestanis, Uzbeks, Kyrgyz people and many others. It's also a spiritual centre. But it's really a social one too, because this is a rare place where Moscow's Muslims, who are sort of scattered along ethnic lines, can come together, and it represents a growing part of the country's religious life, one that is increasingly visible, but still navigating the challenges of the space, visibility and recognition in a society that is mainly Christian. But yeah, here it is, the Cathedral Mosque. Just a quick note, if you're enjoying this content, please consider becoming a paid member of this channel by clicking the join button below this video. On YouTube, anything even slightly positive about Russia gets demonetized and buried by the algorithm. So your support is vital to keep this channel going. Plus, you'll get early access to videos and exclusive content. Thanks a lot. Buddhism may seem out of place in Moscow, but it's definitely not out of place here in Russia. This country is home to 3 traditionally Buddhist regions: Buryatia, Tuva and Kalmykia, each with their own history of monastic life, religious scholarship and spiritual practice. In fact, Kalmykia, which is just west of the Caspian Sea, is the only Buddhist majority region in all of Europe. Here I'm in a place called Tubden-Shedubling. It's a small Tibetan centre tucked away in Moscow's northeast, quite far from the centre. It belongs to the Gelug school of Buddhism, which is the same school led by the world-famous Dalai Lama. And this area, it's not grand or ancient, but that's what makes it interesting. This place here represents a living tradition of Buddhism here in Moscow, one that was nearly completely wiped out in the 20th century. During the Soviet period, Buddhist temples, mainly in Buryatia and Kalmykia, were destroyed. Monks were executed or they were sent to the Gulag, and these traditional Buddhist teachings were banned. They were illegal. Only a handful of religious scholars survived in Russia. And in the 1990s, a quiet revival began, and Moscow's small Buddhist community started to gather again. And today here, Tubden-Shedubling offers teachings, meditation sessions, holiday celebrations. It serves Russia's very large Buryat and Kalmyk communities, because lots of them have moved here to Moscow to work and live. And it also serves ethnic Russians who are interested in Buddhist philosophy. It's a very beautiful and peaceful area, as you can see, with a perfectly manicured lawn and perfectly clean stones. And in a city dominated by Orthodox churches, a place where the loudest religious voices are often nationalistic, this is a quiet, meditative space. Feels very different. It's less about identity and more about an inward practice, It's a reminder for everyone that Russia's spiritual landscape is a lot broader than we think. And I suppose that's what this video is all about. Catholicism in Russia has always existed on the margins. It was introduced originally through foreign communities, mainly Poles and Lithuanians, Germans, French people, and it was often associated with political opposition, especially during the imperial era. And in the eyes of the Russian state at that time, Catholicism was foreign, it was Western, it was potentially subversive. But its communities endured, and this cathedral you see behind me, the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception, opened in 1911. It was built with private donations from Moscow's Catholic community, and it's designed in a neo-Gothic style, which really stands out sharply here in Moscow against the Orthodox domes around the city. Its spires, its stained glass, its pointed arches, it could easily belong somewhere, I don't know, in a Krakow or Vienna, not Moscow. But the Soviet years were harsh. In 1938 the building was seized, and for decades it was used as a warehouse, a hostel, a concert hall. No services were held here for over 60 years, and only in the late 1990s did the Catholic Church regain control, and it took years and years of legal battles and restoration to make it usable again. Today here in Moscow, the cathedral serves an international congregation: Polish people, Lithuanian people, Armenian, Filipino, Latin American, and of course some ethnic Russian Catholics. It's also one of the few places in Moscow where you'll regularly hear Latin hymns echoing off the stone walls of the church. And I think this building is both a religious site and a cultural landmark. It's a quiet outpost of Catholic Europe, here deep inside the Russian capital. Lutheranism came to Russia through the back door, not through missionaries or conquest, but through trade. And in the 17th and 18th centuries, German merchants, craftsmen, diplomats settled in Moscow and St. Petersburg, and they brought their faith with them. And the Tsars encouraged this, especially Peter the Great, who wanted to modernize Russia, and he saw Protestant Europe as a model. By the 19th century, Moscow's German community was pretty big. It was large enough to build churches and schools and hospitals. This behind me here is a cathedral. It's dedicated to the saints of Peter and Paul, and it was completed in 1905. It's modest and plain and unornamented, reflecting the Lutheran focus on scripture and community and simplicity. But that simplicity didn't save them from Soviet repression. Like most churches during the Soviet Union, it was seized. For a while it actually served as a cinema, and then it became office space. Services, of course, stopped, and the German community, already shrinking during the Soviet Union, was devastated during the war. Many were deported or imprisoned during Stalin's purges. And only in the 1990s did Lutheran worship return to this building. And today the congregation here is small, but it's active. It's holding services in Russian, German and English. I know a German guy here actually who worships at this church, and he told me he likes it because for him it's a place that feels more like a community centre rather than a religious institution. Now here's a religion you might not have heard of: Rodnovery, or Slavic neo-paganism. It's not just a religion, it's also a cultural movement. It seeks to revive the pre-Christian beliefs of the ancient Slavs, like gods of nature, seasonal rituals, ancestor worship, and a spiritual connection to the land. Most of this paganism was wiped out in Russia by the spread of Orthodox Christianity in the 10th century, but today a small number of Russians are trying to bring it back. There are no official pagan temples here in Moscow. There's no ancient shrines or archaeological ruins But here in this beautiful park, it's called Kolomenskaya Park, on the banks of the river Moscow, here in the south of the city, there are two massive stones that many people, many pagans, believe are remnants of a forgotten past. One is linked to a goddess of fertility, and the other to a god of strength and vitality. And in recent years, these stones have become sites of pilgrimage. Visitors, pagans, leave offerings, they tie coloured ribbons to the surrounding trees, and they sometimes perform, mainly small ceremonies in small groups. Some see it as a spiritual thing, and others see it as a patriotic Russian nationalistic thing. Rodnovery is a complicated mix of religion, folklore, and Russian identity politics. Sometimes romantic, sometimes political in many ways, and sometimes controversial. But it's a real thing, and it's growing here in Russia. And for me, it's a reminder that here in a super ultra modern city like Moscow, the ancient past, not just the recent past, the ancient past still has its pull for people. And it's a reminder that not all spirituality here comes from books or buildings. Sometimes it comes from stones and trees and memory. In the 17th century, a major rift split the Russian Orthodox Church. Patriarch Nikon, backed by the Tsar, introduced reforms to bring Russian Orthodox practice in line with Greek Orthodoxy, and the changes seemed pretty small, like the spelling of Jesus' name or the number of fingers used to make the sign of the cross, certain texts. But for many believers, they were totally unacceptable. They were seen by some people not to be reforms. They believed they were distortions of the true faith. And the people who refused these reforms became known as the Old Believers. And Old Believers paid dearly. For over 2 centuries, they were persecuted in Russia. They were exiled, executed, they were forced underground, but they didn't disappear. They actually formed tight-knit communities in remote areas. They preserved pre-reform Russian Orthodoxy in its purest form. And here where I am now, Rogozhskaya Sloboda in Moscow's southeast became a centre for Old Believers in the 18th century. This complex, which is walled, self-contained, traditional, was a place where Old Believers could maintain their way of life, even as the outside world changed. During Soviet times, of course, it was watched, but it was tolerated, and today it's fully legal and it's still active. And Old Believers are not a museum piece. They still hold services and still dress in traditional clothes. They still chant from handwritten books. This place is not about nostalgia for the past, it's about continuity. And this here is a version of Russian Christianity that refused to change but survived anyway, here in places like Rogozhskaya Sloboda. Moscow is full of grand religious buildings, cathedrals, mosques, temples, but its real spiritual life is in the layers of the city. These traditions weren't always welcome here. Many of the religions I've spoken about, including Orthodox Christianity, were suppressed, ridiculed, ignored, but they stayed, or they left and they came back. Because religion in Moscow today isn't just about belief, it's about survival, identity, and sometimes quiet resistance. It's lived in prayer halls and stone circles, in German hymns and in Buddhist mantras, in Catholic Latin and in Hebrew blessings. And while the Orthodox Church still shapes the city's image, it's the diversity behind that surface that tells a fuller story. The story that Moscow has always been more complicated than it looks, and that its soul, just like its skyline, is made up of many different shapes and not just onion domes.